My grandfather heard them clearly. He said they weren't any stronger or weaker than before. They were the same. They didn't have words, they didn't have insults, they didn't have names. It was a long complaint, a woman's voice coming from a house where everyone already knew there was no one inside. Good evening, community. We welcome you to a new installment of this October of Stories, this time with a topic that is heavy, dense, especially these days, in this month when the world of the spiritual, of the paranormal, intertwines with ours. It's a month to be very careful, even with what seems like the most innocent of games. Or could you end up like the protagonists of our next stories? Without further ado, it's time to move on to the tales. So, today you have one last chance to stop listening, especially if this is a sensitive topic for you or if you've had any previous experience with it. These topics need to be addressed and listened to with great care. It's time to begin. Are you listening to Relatos de la Noche? When my aunt died, I had to help clean her house. She wasn't the closest in the family. She was my mom's cousin, with no siblings, but we lived in the same state and sometimes we visited her on her birthday or on Christmas Day. She always seemed like a serious woman to me, too reserved. I always wondered why she never got married or started a family. When we went to clean, the house was nearly empty. She didn't have many things, but everything was well kept. Organized, old furniture, jars with handwritten labels, portraits of people nobody recognized, a lot of them. I started checking the drawers of the dresser that was in her bedroom. They were heavy wooden drawers, and in one of them I noticed that the bottom sounded hollow. I lifted it carefully and found a hidden compartment. Inside there was something covered with a red velvet cloth and tied with a leather strap. On the strap engraved was my name, my full name. For a moment I just stared at it, not knowing what to think. I was never his favorite nephew, not even close, not even the closest one. In fact, we barely talked, but I thought it was nice that he had left me something. Maybe it was valuable, so I have to admit that I kept it without saying anything and took it home. I didn't want it to go through the inspection and distribution that my family was organizing either. That night when I got home, I took out my inheritance as I thought of it and took it from my backpack where I had hidden it. I was very curious, so I untied the ribbon, removed the cloth, and opened it. It was a mirror, a beautiful little mirror, old, with a golden frame and an embossed engraving that looked like intertwined branches. A mirror like the ones women carry in their purses for putting on makeup. There was nothing strange about it, except that it hadn't reflected me as a child right away. There was something dull about it. I felt like it took just a moment, but I noticed it. I thought it was my imagination or the dim light in my room. I put it on the nightstand and turned off the light. But after a little while I heard a noise, very faint, coming from inside the bathroom. Someone tapping on glass, the window or the mirror, but glass. I got up, turned on the light, checked the bathroom, nothing, but I really thought I had heard it. Days went by and I forgot about it until I started to notice something that didn't let me rest easy. When I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror with the light on, off, or with the door half open, I felt like my reflection wasn't moving at the same time as me. I'm not sure if this makes sense. It was just a split second of difference, but enough to make me feel really uncomfortable. I thought about recording it with a cell phone, but I didn't want to see what might come out afterward. I started waking up at night, but not because of the knocks, but because of a voice. A woman's voice coming from the bathroom. But as soon as I was fully awake, I stopped hearing it, as if I could only perceive it while asleep or half awake. So one morning I told my mom she listened to me in silence without interrupting me. And when I finished, she didn't laugh, she didn't make fun of me, she didn't even doubt me. The first thing she said to me was, "Bring it, please, but well covered." I went for the mirror. She took it without looking at it, wrapped it again with the red cloth, tied the same leather strap around it, and asked me to go with her. We drove to my aunt's house. The door still had the black ribbon from the wake. We went in without saying a word, crossed the yard, and reached the back, where there was a huge fig tree. With an old shovel, my mom dug a few inches and placed the mirror inside, then covered it with dirt, put a stone on top, and said quietly, "These are your aunt's things." I don't know what it was, but it wasn't anything good, and I hope it stays buried there. I didn't ask anything else. I stayed quiet the whole way back, and to this day I never ask anything about it. That same night I slept peacefully for the first time in days. But since then, always before I go to sleep, even if it's just for a few seconds, I think about that mirror, about whether we really buried it deep enough, about whether someone else might find it someday, unwrap it, finish what someone started, whatever it was that was supposed to happen. The house still hasn't been sold. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it keeps her in uncertainty. My mom always says that there are things you shouldn't touch, even if you don't believe in them. That some people, like my aunt, get involved with matters, if you can call them that they don't fully understand, and many times the rest of us end up paying the consequences. Thank you. The first time my grandfather told me what I'm about to share with you now, it was in his living room with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. I remember very well those quiet afternoons when you could hear the sound of the sea. My grandfather had lived as a young man in another coastal town, very similar to ours. In fact, I'm not going to say the name, not because I don't want the people from there to feel ashamed. They have lived with these stories all their lives. I just feel it doesn't add anything to the story. It was one of those places where the houses are far apart from each other, where the breeze always smells like salt and mixes with the scent, gasoline from the small boats that go out fishing every day. A town where everyone wants to know everything about everyone else, but does no one really get involved in anything? Over there, everyone minds their own business, my grandfather used to say. And when they said their own business, they meant everything. The fights, the romances, the debts, the shames, and also those things that nowadays we would think there's an obligation to intervene in. In that village lived a man who didn't like anyone coming near his house. No one knew where he came from. One day, he showed up with his wife, his spouse, and they settled in a small house at the end of a dirt road that led to the beach. They lived there for 12 years. The house was poor, with wooden walls and a tin roof. People used to say it was a sad house, not because it was abandoned, but because it truly had a sadness attached to it. I'm not sure how to explain it without exaggerating, but that's how my grandfather used to say it. Have you seen how there are houses that invite you to sit outside and visit them, and there are others that ask you to just walk by? This was one of the latter. When you walked by, the only thing you thought about was getting away from there. You hardly ever saw the wife. At first, she would come out dressed in black. Both of them would stand for a while looking at the sea and then go back inside. But after that, she hardly ever came out. And then someone said they had seen her in a wheelchair in the yard, under a shade the man had made for her with old tarps. It seemed like she had a skin disease. Her husband always protected her from the direct sun, sometimes even covering her face and hands with a cloth. You could see from afar that the lady was getting worse and worse. You can tell when someone is going to die, and she had been dying for a long time already. She must have had some serious illness. The man was known for being grumpy. If you walked near his house and happened to look inside, He would stare right at you, cross his arms, or slow down his work, but never take his eyes off you. Just so you'd get the message. Nobody wanted trouble with a neighbor. Just like in that place, everyone looks after their own little spot, their corral, their nets, their animals. The thing was, you just shouldn't get close. And not out of fear anymore, but out of respect. That's what the elders said. Although the truth is, what there really was fear, a lot of fear, and they didn't understand why. It was around that time that they started. The screams weren't the kind of screams from a fight or an argument. The ones with insults, slamming doors, and broken dishes. They were long, drawn-out screams from a woman, like someone crying out in pain. The first time they heard them was on a night that was very, very hot. My grandfather and some other guys were sitting on the beach when the sound came over the sea. That first night, not everyone admitted to hearing it. According to some, they hadn't heard anything. But no one went near the old man's house. Everyone took the long way back to the village. Afterwards, it became a habit. A few days would pass, sometimes weeks, and in the early morning, when the noise of the village died down completely, the screams would return. A neighbor who lived in one of the houses closest to the old man's swore he heard what sounded like a woman, as if she were begging for something to end. Another said no, that was made up, that what you heard was nothing more than a complaint, a kind of sigh. And so everyone with their own version would go to sleep and the next day go fishing, fix nets, go to school, do whatever they had to do, but no one would cross in front of that house anymore. Rumors started that the man wouldn't let his wife go out, that he didn't want to take her to the doctor because he was afraid that he and his house would be left without the little help they were given, that in the afternoons he would take her out for a little while so she could get some fresh air. That's why you could see the chair where she often complained to God and the saints about what had happened to them. Others swore that it was all a lie, that the woman was fine, that what people heard was just the gusts of wind coming from the sea. Among poor people, you learn to keep things simple since they're already complicated. And the rule in that town, like in many others, was simple. If the house isn't yours, don't get involved. Nobody touches, nobody asks. Months went by like that. My grandfather got a job helping a man who used to fish, early in the morning. At noon, when the sun was hottest, he would take a short nap and then go buy tortillas. The rumor was almost gone, and the people who used to hear it had already learned to ignore it. Some changed their route to never pass in front of the house, but others, out of morbid curiosity, started doing it more often, just to see what they could see. One morning, the man from that house fainted. It happened at the market. People saw him stagger, suddenly say something no one could quite hear, and then he fell. They carried him to some shade. A woman poured water on his forehead. A man tried to open his mouth with a spoon, as if he were having convulsions, even though he wasn't. "We have to let his wife know," said a nosy woman, almost as if they finally had an excuse. My grandfather went with that woman and another man from the market. They walked quickly through the dirt streets until they reached the metal door that faced the street. Before that, they crossed the yard. "Hello," the woman shouted from outside. "Hey, your husband fainted," she continued. My grandfather also shouted at her, but no one answered. They went in. The patio smelled damp. Under the canvas roof, they saw the wheelchair. It was in the sun, but the woman was covered from head to toe. "Ma'am," my grandfather said and took a step toward her, but she didn't answer either. "Ma'am, your husband felt sick," insisted the gossip, and with her fingertips she grabbed the edge of the blanket and pulled it. My grandfather never told unnecessary details, but here he did pause. He said that the first thing they saw were her hands because that's how she was positioned, with her hands on her lap, and they looked like they were made of wood. They weren't just bare bones. It wasn't like that, he clarified. It was bones stuck together, but still covered with skin. I didn't know what a mummy was back then, but that was a mummified body. Then they saw the face. It had some kind of cloth stuck to the mouth, which maybe had once been a handkerchief. It didn't smell strong. It didn't smell like something recently dead. It smelled like a closed-up house, like earth, like old cloth. My grandfather said it seemed like it had been there for years. They came out of there slowly, as if they were afraid that a sudden movement would make that body fall apart. They didn't make a fuss. They arrived at the market. The man, who had already come to his senses, was still pale. They put him in a neighbor's truck, who had permission to take people out to the highway toward the capital. It wasn't an ambulance, there weren't any, but that's how they used it. My grandfather said the man didn't ask any questions. He just let himself be taken without knowing where to, like someone who finally got tired, or as if he wanted to escape the town. They admitted him to a psychiatric hospital. That's what they said. After that, the house was left empty. The news, if you can call it news, spread quietly, without shouting, among the fish stalls, in the courtyards, in the bakery line. The lady was dead. She'd been that way for years, so then who was screaming? No one answered that question. The first few days, with the house empty, people in the village paid attention to the night. It was only natural. There was a strong curiosity, the expectation, the desire for the screams to stop. And the house was silent for 2 nights, but then they came back. My grandfather heard them clearly. He said they weren't louder or weaker than before. They were the same. They had no words, no insults, no names. It was a long wail, a woman's voice coming from a house where everyone already knew there was no one. There were some who said it was a cat, or maybe the wind, or that it was a prank by some kids. There were some who, frankly, gathered their things and moved in with relatives for a few weeks, at least the 2 families who lived closest to that place. And on one of those nights, my grandfather's godfather, a man with a strong character, was the one who dared to go and check, to open the house, to see what kept causing that scream every night. When the police had come for the body, the only thing they said was that the woman had died of old age, and that the only fault the man had committed was being too crazy to have ever reported it. That was the only thing but my grandfather's godfather wanted to see. He and a few friends, during a drunken spree, decided to open the doors, to go into the house to see if there was anyone left in there who screamed night after night. But the only thing they found were symbols on the floor and on the walls, made with salt and blood, respectively. That little house was filled with figures of angels and the devil. The story spread. The church got involved, and the priest said that if they wanted, he could bless the house. An afternoon was organized from outside. Only a few people went, and my grandfather stayed far away, at one of those distances where you can hear, but you don't feel like you're part of it. The priest prayed, made a cross with holy water on the door. Someone left a candle, but everyone went back to their own things. And that night the screams came back, once, twice, 3 times, louder than ever. This time they didn't stay in the neighboring houses, in the nearby streets. That night the screams filled the whole town. And time went by. A few months later, for some reason, someone from the town hall locked the door with a new padlock and put up tape like a crime scene so that no one would go in. At first, no one knew why. My grandfather wasn't a man with strange beliefs. He believed in God, yes, like almost everyone, but he also believed in what he saw with his own eyes. That's why, when he told me about it, he insisted on leaving things as they are. And in that innocence, he didn't believe it was a ghost, nor that the woman came back every night. He didn't believe that man was a monster. What he believed was that, for whatever reason, That man kept his wife's body for years, and that, at night, in that town, what people heard were screams, like a trapped memory, a memory that couldn't find a way out. But that belief didn't last forever because the man, the husband, eventually spoke. Because that man, whom many considered a monster, told someone a truth, asking them not to spread it around the town. My grandfather doesn't know if it was at the psychiatric hospital, where he once received a visit from someone from the town, or if it was on the way to him when he confided in the man who was taking him to get treatment. What the man said was that he was simply following the woman's instructions, but he made it clear that she wasn't his wife, that she had stolen him from a town which he no longer remembered anything about, where he had a wife and daughters. He said he was trapped, that she told him she was going to die, but she was going to use him, that he had to follow the instructions when she was gone, preserve her body, take care of it, not let anyone get close. He had to take care of that corpse for 7 years so that she could come back. He had to follow the rituals to the letter so that everything would go well, so that she could come back. But he couldn't take it, maybe his body couldn't take it because he collapsed that day in the market. That's why they say the lock was put there, so that no one would enter, so that no one would try to finish that ritual to bring her back. That the moans were from the woman demanding that he finally carry out the ritual that would allow her to return, and that her evil soul remained trapped in that house where it continued to be heard for a very, very long time, even after my grandfather was already old when he left the town. He always got sad when telling this, especially because he thought about the fate of that man, if what he said was true, about the family that never heard from him again, and about what the whole town thought, hating him, believing he was even worse. I hope you're still listening to this episode about a topic that, as I mentioned in the introduction, must be approached with great caution. If you've had any experience with this, leave it in a comment, even if you don't dare to tell the whole story. We'd like to know how many of you have ever felt that you've been at least close to a ritual or to someone who practices one. I really appreciate it if you're already subscribed and part of this community, and if not, this is the moment. Join the best community on the entire internet, and also go join our Facebook group where we have an extremely kind community. They share stories with complete trust, never insult each other, and are truly like a family. In the description of this episode, I will leave all the necessary links so you can follow us everywhere, so you can share with us how you listen to Relatos de la Noche. And there is something very important I need to tell you. The only official Instagram or TikTok account, no dot, no double S, nothing. Because there are more and more fake pages. We're not going to mention them by name, but they steal our work. Make it clear the main series is official and only on RDL and official, since others steal your stories. Some on TikTok even ask for money. Remember, we will never, ever, ever ask you for a subscription or a donation through TikTok or Instagram or anything like that. Please don't fall for it. But now let's go with one more story, because there are still stories left tonight calling. No. We'll see you later. See you. Thank you. Because this is only for those who follow us on Instagram. Hello, Uriel. I don't know if you'll get to read this, but I hope you do. I need to tell you something that happened to me and my brother a few years ago. Something that completely changed the way I see things, and for me was proof that the supernatural really does exist. I prefer to remain anonymous because only my family knows about this. When I mention it to other people, I always refer to it as my accident on the amusement ride, but I never tell them the rest. Today I want to do it here because I feel this is the place where it should be. At that time I was 10 years old and my brother Victor was 12. We were both altar boys. In the town church, my grandparents were very religious. My grandfather was Christian, and my grandmother was in charge of preparing the masses. At that time, only 2 days remained before the temple festival. They were already setting up the rides, the food stands, the bounce houses, and among all of that, there was a ride called the Kangaroo. It was one of those that spin and bounce with long cars and very loud music. My grandma called me that day to bring her things to the temple. As I went through the atrium, I saw my brother and other kids playing on a platform. I went over to see and asked them what they were doing, and one of them answered, "We're playing Pinky Pinky." They explained to me that it was something like Charlie Charlie, but with an eagle coin, it meant something. I asked them if I could play, but my brother told me no, that I was too scared and that I would end up getting frightened. But one of the kids insisted on letting me play. If she gets scared, that's her problem, he said. So they made room for me to start. I had to ask, "Pinky Pinky, can I join your game and pitch?" The coin landed on heads. That meant yes. Everyone went quiet. Looking at me strangely, one of the kids said it was the first time someone got in on the first try. I just laughed, thinking it was luck. We kept playing for a while until I thought of asking something that to this day I don't know why I did. I asked, "Pinky, Pinky, am I going to have an accident soon?" The coin landed on heads, yes. I asked if it would be on a trampoline. It landed on tails, no. I asked if it would be on a mechanical ride. It answered yes. And then, very scared, I asked, "Am I going to die?" Did the coin land on tails? It won't be a serious accident that I'll have to go to the hospital for. I asked again, did the coin land on heads? Yes. We were stunned. We all decided to end the game as we should, asking if Pinky would let us all out. He let everyone out the first time except me. I asked once, twice, 5 times, and I always landed on tails. No. Scared, we decided to bury the coin in the temple's atrium. We believed nothing would happen on blessed ground, so everyone went home. Within days, I completely forgot about it. Until the festival arrived, I was excited. My mom was going to buy us pizza, corn, toys, and she would let us go on a ride. I wanted the kangaroo ride. My brother and I went straight there. They strapped us in with some chains around our waists, lowered the safety bar, and the music started. The ride spun fast, went up and down. Everything was fine until I saw that the man operating it was losing control. The lever slipped out of his hand and the ride started spinning even faster. The chains broke. I heard my brother shout, "Hold on." The chain snapped. "Hold on." He managed to wedge his foot in the seat. I could only hold on with my hands. I closed my eyes and felt a really hard hit, and then everything just went black. It wasn't like falling, it was like floating. I was slowly falling into a dark void, and then I heard a laugh that was mocking me. First it was one, then there were several, until there were many, many voices laughing all at once. And then I saw something. A tall figure with a human body and a goat's head. It seemed to be smiling. It had no eyes. I could only see the empty sockets. I don't know if it was a dream, if I was unconscious, or if I really saw it, but I remember it with a clarity I can't explain to you. Then I felt another blow. I woke up. "Sir," he pulled me to get me out. I had blood in my mouth. I had a deep wound on my leg. They handed me over to my mom and she took me to a place to sit while they asked for help, but the ambulances never arrived. The owner's son took us to the hospital in his truck. I remember I was very sleepy, really heavy sleep. My brother was shaking me and saying, "Don't fall asleep, little sister. We're almost there. Don't go to sleep." But I could still hear the laughter. I could still hear it like they were with us. In the hospital, they put me on a stretcher and everything faded away. I woke up when they were stitching up the huge wound on my leg, and to this day, I still have the scar. I never saw that thing again, but I never forgot the laughter. Sometime later, my brother told me something that scared me even more that night. He also heard the laughter. He also saw that figure. The strangest thing is that I never told him what I had seen. He didn't know until 3 years later when I was finally able to talk about the accident. Since then, I've had other experiences, but none as intense as that one. I still believe that whatever Pinky was, Pinky is still there. Recently, someone slept in my room and told me they had sleep paralysis, that they couldn't speak or move. But when they turned, they saw a black shadow standing next to my bed. They couldn't see its face, but they knew it was watching us. That was just 2 months ago, and I think that's when I understood that even though they buried him, we entered blessed ground. That portal we opened when we were kids never really closed completely.